All right, we are live. Josh, how you doing today, man?
I am doing well, and this is going to be an interesting episode, Chorizy, because out of all Star Wars content, this particular episode in the Acolyte is generating perhaps a lot more negative reaction to it
Just a
than no
lot of
matter what
anger.
side you're on of The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. Like, the feedback has not been great.
Yeah, and on weird things. So I think we'll jump into it, but I think the first thing that we're going to get into is a tweet from you, which was that you like the plot so far, but either the acting or the editing or maybe both you don't like. Expound on this because I think like some of the acting is very good,
Yes.
but I do see where there are some cracks and get into what was most impacting you.
Yeah. So I want to be careful here because judging child actors to me is almost a no-go because they're so inexperienced and they're kids. Like they don't even understand their own range of emotions. And to be a polished actor, you have to understand not only your range of emotions, but also understand a character and portray what that character's range of emotions are going to be. And when working with child actors and I guess critiquing as far as their ability, I've always put that onus on the director and the editor. Make them look good. I've had experience. I know Chorizy secondhand. You have had experience with Chorizy being on productions when kids are involved, and it those are often long days, and it takes multiple takes and it takes multiple shots because if they don't nail it, that's fine. The joke is always we could fix it in post, right? We can make them look good and put them at their best in post. I found that after a second watch of this episode, I really do not like the editing of this particular episode. I don't think they are taking the best takes, and maybe they are, and that presents a whole sort of problems as well. And just taking like notes doing the second watch, there's two big problems that I have with this particular episode when it comes to the editing. And I think there's just too much distraction, and it just leaves like, what the hell was going on? One is the common room training. So while Mother Anastasia is doing a phenomenal job, and the actor, that's great acting. Mother Anastasia, great acting to your point, Chorizy. Explaining the difference between the thread and the force. But then you have Osha and May, and it seems so forced. Like trying to be siblings fighting in the background because Oshi took the ball that was floating in the air or a piece of fruit. I'm not even sure what it was. It's too jarring and it distracts you from what Mother Anastasia is demonstrating on her ability to use either the thread or the force. So I don't think that was good as far as directing. And it's unfortunate. That's just not a good scene. You have too many distractions in the background. And then the end of the episode, which I'm sure we'll talk further in depth, awful. There's no other way for me to put that right now. Is just awful. The blocking is bad. It's just it is. Why are people together in huge groups just laying on the ground, suddenly dead, and you don't know how they died?
Hey,
And
there's a
maybe
Wookiee around, all right?
yeah, well, a Wookiee will rip your arms off and beat you to death with them. Like, come on, like no, it just yeah, that ending part just makes me shake my head. It's like landing at Midway in Chicago and the front parking gear collapses and your nose just drags along the runway. That's how this episode ended. Like there's a lot of turbulence as far as production wise. There are some smooth parts, crash landing. And this is the worst rated Star Wars episode out of all the TV shows, according to IMDb.com, and even the movies. So I might be nitpicking here, but when it comes to the production value, I'm not putting it so much on the acting. I'm going to put this on the directing and the editing. The post production in this episode is poor.
So I've got a couple points to make here off of yours, of what you said. So first, like I want to get some drinks in you, and find out how much you hated the big-headed kid from Jerry Maguire. Like that's the first and foremost. I need answers on that because like I feel like there's some vitriol for bad child acting. Not that he was bad, he was. But the second is like I think that editing was poor in some of these sections, especially with the kids. There's a scene at the beginning when they're under the punta tree, and the editing switches their positioning, and you because you're just being introduced to these two kids that look very similar, you don't know which one's which.
Right.
And like they say something, and you're like, that seems out of character. Oh, that's the other kid.
Yeah.
Like so like on second watch, I was like, yeah, there are some editing pieces that I don't love, you know, things. And we've talked about this before, but I don't love a lot of stuff with the volume. I think that there's like really great uses for the volume, and then there's somewhere it's like, this is kind of weird. But the last point that I want to make is like, regardless of the acting, regardless of the editing, I think that they convey the point that they want to with the kids, which is these kids, while they are threaded together,
yes,
while they're twins, they are very distinctly different from one another, or at least ocean. And so I think that part is at least conveyed in this. And I think that's good. So I think that, like, to your point in your tweet, like the plot seems to be still in a very good spot. Like I think the story is going well. I think this particular episode even was the most episodic of the series so far, where like you had like a real beginning and end to a single story. Now there's going to be different versions of this, I assume, during the season, but like it I very much at the end of it felt like, okay, there's some conclusion to this story. So I did like that part of it. But as we're talking about the kids, there's something that was funny to me in this, is when they come in there and they're like, hey, you can't be training these kids. What's wrong with you? That's against the rules. And then like quickly turn to, we need to train your kids. Yeah. Like it's just a wild switch. And like, this is something we've always known from the Jedi. And like, this is a, you know, like ever since the kind of prequel era, like you really got sight into this, and like why Yoda was like, oh, Luke's way too old to be training, right? Like you started to see like, oh, they get these kids really young, blah, blah, blah. But in this particular scene and in this particular project, like, do you think that they're trying to show that the Jedi are starting to erode their goodwill with the galaxy, right? They're putting the like kind of like rules for thee, but not for me. And are people going to start getting tired of that?
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I don't know if it's so much eroding, but I think this episode does an excellent job, to your point, Chorizy, that the Jedi are not consistent. For Soul to say the Jedi do not take children, I'm glad you got this screen capture, especially for those that are watching the live stream or even the video at youtube.com/from the108. For those listening to the podcast version of this, when Soul says the Jedi don't take children, and then later says, I was 4 years old when the Jedi tested me. I mean, yeah, to your point, like the Jedi incredibly inconsistent, and they've always been inconsistent. And I think what we've seen from Star Wars post Rian Johnson,
come on now,
is trying to portray that the Jedi aren't as good as you think they are. And especially, this is like, is this the peak of the Jedi in this period?
Yeah, so the High Republic is
High
like
Republic?
the most peaceful era, that they're at their highest power.
Right.
This is
largest quantity of Jedi.
Right. Like what we see in the prequels is like all a steady downfall of the Jedi, right? Like, so this is 100 years before that. This is where I think like the cracks in the armor are starting to show.
Yeah, or cracks that people like the Coven and others that could wield the Force are pointing out, that the Jedi are inconsistent with their operations. So I appreciate it, though. I appreciate that it is punching at this covenant of what the Jedi are, and they are a covenant as well. Like they're not foolproof, and they're suspect to corruption as well, and their means are not the only way. Like they call it, and Mother Anastasia says that in the training room, which I thought was a very important point, uh, because it's this mystical, magical power that people could wield in this universe. Some call it the Force, and they claim to use it, but for this covenant, they portray this particular power as a thread. And also in this episode later on, with Mother Anastasia uh, is trying to reason with Osha, like this is about power and who gets to use it. The
Yeah.
Jedi believe they're the only ones
I
that get
thought
to
that was a
use it.
great line. I thought that
Yes.
was a great line. And I think
Yeah.
it drives home the point. It drives home the point that they're trying to make in this episode of like the Jedi really overstepping their bounds.
Right.
Um,
I'll just get on my soapbox here. For those that are criticizing the plot of the Acolyte, especially in this episode, about they're just trying to make Jedi bad guys. I mean, bitches, what is the best? What is one of the best MCU movies? It's Captain America Civil War. Like the conflict, are they actually doing good, the Avengers? And then they have these big fights because they're divided and they go against each other. And that obviously leads into Avengers Infinity War. Like this is what makes storytelling great. They're
and
not always going to be good.
this is what broke the Jedi up originally, right? Like the heretics of the Jedi, the ones that go to become Sith, like that's because they were telling them, "Hey, you can't do this. You can do this, but you can't do this." And it's like,
Right.
why can't I use the Force in every way that it's available? And that's again what you're seeing here. Like you can practice it this way, but not this way. And that's at the core of the problem.
And good and bad are subjective,
Yeah.
right? Like one
We'll get into that
patriot,
in a little bit.
yeah, one country or one person's patriot is a terrorist to another.
Exactly.
So like because we got the comment from Terry's that Jedi, they're not bad guys, but they are flawed. Correct. They are monkish. They believe in preserving life. They don't believe in manipulating life unless they're in danger.
I want to know about that in a little bit. We're gonna swing back to that, but I have a question for you because like this brought up something in the pre run up to the show. There was a lot of talk about episode 3 having a force ability that you've not seen yet, and I think a lot of people pointed to the fact that the kids were seemingly created out of thin air, right? This fatherless birth of the children. But I don't think that's it because we've actually seen that. Like Anakin doesn't have a father. And
Right.
like it's often uh theorized that it's Plagueis or Palpatine or both that conceived him through the Force, right? By manipulating midichlorians. And so my question to you is, where did these kids come from?
Oh, I think Mother Anastasia using the thread, because she's obviously a very, very powerful force user, was able to, I don't know if she uses midichlorians, but let's just use that, was able to conceive twins into another being. I mean, to create life, is that the ultimate force
I would
power?
I would think so, right? Like, I mean, that's kind of what Plagueis in this is Legends, but like Plagueis is chasing that, right? Like being able to manipulate life, right? Like being able to say, like, I'm going to kill this person and bring him back to life, or I'm just going to create a new life out of kind of nowhere. Um, I I like that idea. I kind of wonder though, when you think about it from the aspect of Filoni trying to save the the sequel trilogy,
Yeah.
is this maybe like the start of like the Strandcast clone idea? Like, is this possibly someone working with the Coven to help them create like a clone or clones of Mother Anastasia Like that's one thing that I thought, and like we don't know a lot about Darth Tenebris, who would be basically at this time he would be like the main Sith villain out there, but there is a lot about like how he was very scientific and all these things.
Mhm.
Like, could we be seeing like the Sith had been trying this all along, and here's one of their experiments, and it's May and Osha.
Yeah, I don't know if they're clones. I'm gonna say that the intention is Mother Anastasia conceived them using the thread.
Okay.
That once in a century the moons aligned, and I'm at my absolute ultimate power. And using Mother Coral, who volunteered herself, I was able to conceive May and Osha. That's what I'm going to run with. Do you think that they're clones?
I think that there's a Sith that has something to do with this. Like it keeps coming back to me that and it keeps coming back to me that Soul is the mastermind of all of this. Because the fact that they found these guys in this like deserted planet in this fortress, they knew that there was kids there, like all this stuff, it's just a little too convenient that like someone wasn't a part of this. So like I think like it could be that like they're going to change who Darth Tenebris. Dude, there's not a lot about Darth Tenebris. They're going to change Darth Tenebris into a Sith in this, and I still think it's Soul. Like I still think he's playing both sides. There's just like too many things about the way that he talks to the kids and how attached he is to them. The fact that he says, "You'll never have this pain again, I promise." Like that is like straight out of the Sith handbook.
Okay.
You know, dealing in absolutes, all that stuff. So like it just kind of feels like they're leaning towards that. I was watching New Rockstars. I love their breakdowns. I haven't watched. I always wait until after we do ours to watch their previous one, and so I was watching theirs for 1 and 2, and they were talking about Soul being like light, and that there's going to be like some kind, or like being like the sun, and there's going to be like some kind of moon name for this Sith. That's what they're thinking. Tenebris basically means dark and murky. So like Soul versus that. So like I feel like if that is the case, like Tenebris makes the most sense, and it's time wise correct. I just wonder if they're going to try and force in the clone kind of strandcast thing, because they got to make that more and more a piece of this to go like everything made sense in the sequel trilogy.
Yeah, there's definitely a part of that. Yes.
All right, well, let's get to
the long campaign. Let's just call it that. The long campaign of making Rise of Skywalker make sense.
Let's get to the meat of this episode, which is the disaster that happens. And we see May seemingly start the fire. I don't think we really see much of that. She sets the book on fire, right? And all of a sudden, the place is blowing up. Like just like if this would be the equivalent of if you lit your grill on your balcony and like it kind of like the flames jumped off a little bit and you're like putting it out there and then your whole house exploded. Like this is the same equivalent. So like the noise at the beginning of the episode when they're like go put the kids away and they run into that kind of like reactor looking room, it had to be rigged to explode, right? Like the Jedi are involved in this somehow. Like they're blowing this place up.
Yeah, because with Master Torben in episode 2, right? He says, I forgot what the exact lines was. Like, we thought we were doing
the right thing. We thought we were doing the right thing. Yeah.
Like, from this episode, I still don't know what their intentions were, and that's why, like, again, I don't like the editing at the end of this episode. It creates too murky of like, this looks so poor. Like, I want to know exactly what happened, and hopefully we do see what happened, so it rinses out this awful taste in my mouth. You know what it is? After watching the end of this episode, is like taking a shot of Malort. I need to chase something. I need something. My next drink needs to be way better.
You need a cicada to get that.
I don't need the cicada. No, whatever follow up there is, better tasting that Malort soaked cicada that I had in Milwaukee. But like, to your point, like, it's one thing to take the kids, but I cannot imagine the Jedi would just let the Coven exist. Like, there'd be some type of conversation, right? Of what they do. They wield the Force in dark, mysterious ways. And that's troublesome. We need them to stop. And we will try to be persuasive in getting them to stop. But if they will not stop, we have to stop them because they are a threat to the Republic and they are a threat to the Jedi. I'm hoping we go down that road, especially after this episode, because then it would make sense on why this entire covenant just died. And Soul is perfectly fine. Like,
Is it too sinister to think that the Jedi test that they gave the kids was to see if either of them get to survive? Like, were they gonna be like, well, you're just going down with the flames if you're not willing to become a Jedi? Like, because it seems like they're like, hey, leave the one with the tattoo on her head.
I think they would have anyways, right? Because of attachment.
Yeah.
Attachment's not a good thing when training Jedi. You would have to separate them. So they're only taking one.
Yeah.
And one has already committed to, quote unquote, let's say the dark side or the thread. And Osha wasn't. She was going to be committed to the Jedi. So yeah, to your point, they were never going to take May. They were never going to take both kids. They would only want Osha.
Yeah, and I think one good moment of editing, so we won't make the editor out to be the worst editor of all time. One good part of editing was when they were in the chamber with the Coven, and they said that there was no father, and Soul like pops up and has like this like startled look on his face, and you're like, that's a weird overreaction. But then he immediately says she didn't have that marking on her head earlier, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's what he's reacting to. I thought that was good, and I thought it really drives home the point of like not keeping that one. I don't know if I want it to be quite that sinister, but it feels that sinister. It feels like they were like, we got to kill all these people. Like this is the will of the Force, like that kind of thing, which is wild.
And again, that would go back to Master Torben saying, I thought we were doing the right thing, and I realized we did not. So that's why I'm committing suicide.
And that brings me to the Force ability that we haven't seen, and a question that I have for you. So we see Torben at the end, and this is a great catch by my wife Chorizy at the end of the episode. She's like, "Yo, what happened to Torben's face?" It's off in the distance in the background, but you could see it. Like his eye's all bloody around his eye, and then when you see him you go back to look at him in episode 2, like his eye is still like all damaged. Like maybe someone with some long ass nails that was clicking around earlier in a scene clawed this dude's face. So Mother Anastasia possibly. Do you think that the Force ability that we haven't seen was that Torben somehow had influenced or had control over May, and that's what starts this whole thing?
Ooh, I don't know if I go that far. Torben's just so interesting, like of a character. The way they presented these 4 Jedi so far has been really interesting. Like Soul's the only one that's got clarity. It still works at Coruscant, like the other 3 do not. Why is that the case? What did the other 3 do? So that's a good question. I don't have a good answer right now. I guess I need more Torben to have a more solidified answer. Do you think that's the case? Like, I don't know if I would say Mother Anastasia attacked Torben. Mother Coral, though, for sure would have whooped some ass.
Yeah, maybe she hit him with her head. You know, maybe that's a headbutt with
like
those...
a rhino.
Yeah, I mean, like I definitely think this indicates that there was some kind of struggle, right? But like, there's a difference between May at the beginning when she's at the beginning of the scene when she's setting the place on fire, apparently, and at the end when she's like, "What did you do, OSHA?" Like there's that part of it, and it's just like I don't know if she's just saying, "Hey, you brought these people upon us, and you ruined everything," or if she's like truly thinking like someone was in my head and like I don't know what I just did. Like I don't know which way they're going with that. Torben being a Padawan makes me think probably not the case, but like I don't know, man. He has a lot of guilt about his role in this. And I mean like you think there was only 6 years after this when he goes and does the Barsha vow, which is like a penance, right? Like you did something wrong and you're going to reconnect to the Force until you don't feel like you can wield it properly. So like he definitely did, like there's with that mark on his face immediately after that. It wasn't there earlier, and then this he played more of a role in this than I think we want to know. And I think it might be that Indara and him are the ones that like really did some bad stuff here. And maybe Kalnaka and Sol are just unaware of it.
Well, see this med bay scene at the end, like why is OSHA hooked up? Like when she's walking out with Sol, she seems fine to be walking on her own power, and then all of a sudden she's in a med bay for a really long time. Why is that?
Yeah, that is weird too. That's a good call out.
Again, bad editing. Like they may have missed it. They missed the scene. Like maybe Sol was supposed to, maybe there's a shot that Sol's carrying her because of smoke ventilation. Just like she's breathing in too much smoke, so she's passing out. So Sol had to literally carry her out to save her. Like I would have done this differently. Like not only is OSHA like hooked up and she's waking up from taking in too much smoke or inhaling too much smoke, but then I would have had like a patch over Torben's eye and being like, what happened to him? And like them ignoring that question and just telling OSHA, your sister May started a fire. Like, let's ignore Torben's eye. Let's do that on purpose and let's show that. But they didn't do that. Like it's like, oh, an Easter egg. Torben's eye is fucked up. Why is that? This guy just committed suicide the previous episode. We've never seen a Jedi do that before. Like, sorry, I'm getting off track.
I love it.
Like, but I don't think this episode deserves a 4.1 out of 10 on IMDb.com. I would probably grade it like a 6.5 out of 10. Because ultimately, in the end, I love the story of this. Like, you get a little bit of Night Sisters here. It's another group of people, a covenant of all women who can wield the Force as well and wield this power. We can't just assume it's just Jedi and Sith that can wield this. And maybe one day will be other groups that will be introduced that could use the Force in mysterious in their own ways, and maybe they call it something else. Maybe we'll finally get introduced to Gray Jedi that have been talked about and other sources of material. So I really love this episode, and like I think it's much needed. But yeah, the next two episodes 4 and 5, they're gonna have to pick up some of the slack.
Yeah, I think this is gonna be an episode we go back and rewatch and see like, oh, all these things are happening in this. We didn't pick up on it the first time through. Speaking of next episodes, and we'll wrap it up, are we going back in episode 4? Are we going back to present day? And is Kalnaka about to get all effed up, or is it you think we'll stick with this and we'll see maybe the other version of this story?
No, I'm with you in the first part. We're going to go back to Kalnaka and how May is going to try to assassinate Kalnaka. It won't be by brute force, that's for sure. So it'll be interesting in what she does to try to kill a Wookiee, and how Sol and OSHA try to stop. And we also have to learn about the other Jedi as well that are with Sor. Ford, right?
Yord.
Yord. Oh, that's right. Yord Horde. That's a
The Yord
thing.
Horde.
The
The
Yord
Yord
Horde. And they're so disappointed. There's no Yord in this episode. So
A
they'll be
Yordless
back in episode
episode.
4.
A
Yeah.
Yordless episode. What
Yeah,
what shall we do with ourselves?
That's the only positive thing I've seen on social media right now about this show is hashtag Yord Horde. Like, I love it. Everything else is like, oh my gosh, it's too woke. And come on, it's 2024. All right. Same-sex couples for
people
like
like
a
to be
decade have
angry.
been able to adopt children. Like, get over yourselves.
People just like to be angry, man. They like to be angry about
Evidently.
But
Nothing concrete. Not angry about concrete things like your pacing, your blocking, and editing. Things are important in media. No, not that.
just that, that maybe a woman touched another woman's face. How are we going to get through this?
How are we going to get through this? Indeed, Chorizy. Indeed.
All right. Well, I think that wraps it up for this episode. And I'm really looking forward to next episode. And next episode is kind of the last one that anyone out in the media has seen. So I think we've heard that episode 5 is supposed to be the craziest episode of the series. So we're really getting into it now. Excited to see what that brings. We will see you all next week. Until then, enjoy the show on Tuesday, and we'll talk to you very soon.